Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. Today we're looking at the 2026 House elections and talking about how can the Republicans keep a majority in the House come 2026. Now right now the US House currently has 220 Republicans with 212 Democrats. And that 212 is an interesting number because there are currently 3 vacancies in the US House. Once those vacancies are filled, all of which are in safe Democratic districts, the House would really be 220 for the Republicans, 215 for the Democrats. So the Republicans right now have about a 3-seat majority in the U.S. House of Representatives. You need 218 seats to have majority. And going into 2026, the House is going to be talked about very closely. As in the midterm elections, this is going to be one of the closest House races we have seen in a very long time, even closer than 2024. And the Democrats, going into the midterm of President Trump's second term, want to win the House desperately to try and slow or stop President Trump's agenda as much as possible. Whereas the Republicans want to try and keep the majority in the House and the Senate to try and go through with President Trump's agenda as fast as possible. When you look right now on 270win.com, their consensus map has about 206 seats listed towards the Democrats, 208 listed for the Republicans. Now, before I go more in depth on this, there is a varying degree to these seats. This color right here, the dark blue and the dark red, these are seats that are rated as safe for both the Democrats and Republicans. Meaning, unless something out of nowhere absolutely happens, these seats are all going to go for their respective parties. Democrats would get a minimum of 169, Republicans would get a minimum of 186. Now, these colors, this kind of slightly lighter but still pretty dark shade of blue, and this slightly lighter but still pretty dark shade of red, these are seats that are considered likely for the Democrats and Republicans. These are seats that, based on the election history of these seats and the current candidates running, these are probably going to stay with their respective parties. In the right election scenario, it's possible these seats could shift. For instance, in an amazing night for the Democrats, it's possible that Montana 1 with Ryan Zinke could end up going for the Democrats, but it would be a pretty major surprise. And the same way, for instance, in New Hampshire 2 with Maggie Goodlander, it's possible that in a perfect scenario for the Republicans, that the Republicans can end up winning this seat, but again, it's very unlikely. So I pretty much consider those seats very likely as well. And when you add those to it, Republicans have 16 of those, Democrats have 20. So this brings Democrats up to about 189, and then this brings up Republicans to roughly about 202 or so in terms of those seats. So 202 to 189 is where things essentially start off. And that's not meaning those seats can't go for the other party, but it's more likely that they won't. That leaves these seats, the 17 and 6 seats in the lean category for the Democrats and Republicans, and these 21 seats in this beige toss-up category as the main seats that I'm watching for 2026 that both parties are looking to contest. Now, right now, it's worth noting that 270 to win has given a bunch of these seats to the Democrats and the Republicans, 17 for the Democrats, 6 for the Republicans, but these could all be very competitive in 2026, and how the national election is going could be a very big indicator why. And what I mean by that is, every election usually has a certain type of national environment or national feel to it. Meaning in 2024, for instance, there was very much a feel of President Trump and the Republicans doing very well in that election. And really, when you look across the country, in pretty much every single state, there was a shift towards the Republicans. Whereas you can look in 2018, which was a midterm election in President Trump's first term as president, the Democrats pretty much were doing better in every single state in that election, and the national House vote reflected that. So going into 2026, obviously we're only about 5 to 6 months into President Trump's second term, so it's very early on to talk about the 2026 midterms even now. But things are starting to ramp up, and we're starting to get into the conversation of what could the House elections look like in 2026. Well, the 2024 congressional map, which ended up, as I mentioned, Republicans here had about 211 seats stay on their side, 204 stay on the Democratic side, and they were these seats. 11 seats were Republicans that flipped to the Democrats, and then 9 seats were Democratic that flipped to the Republicans. And I'm bringing this up because not every seat that flipped from red to blue or blue to red is going to be in contention to flip again in 2026, but these are the ones that are very important to watch. For instance, some of these seats shifted due to candidate retirements or the districts being redrawn, and that could be happening again in places like Ohio and Texas in 2026. That's a conversation for a later date. For now, I'm just working with what the map that we have, but that's also an important conversation as well. But for instance, districts like Georgia 6, which was a 49-point win for the Democrat, that's not going to be in contention in 2026. Louisiana 6 was a 13-point win for the Democrat. Again, that's probably not going to be in contention either. On the Republican side, North Carolina 6 and Georgia 7 were both around 30-point wins or more. Those aren't going to be really in contention. But those top 4 or 5 seats, Colorado 8, Pennsylvania 7, Pennsylvania 8, Alaska at large, Michigan 7, they were all very close results. Those seats could very well be contentious again in 2026. Whereas on the Democratic side, very narrow victories in 2 House races in California, California 13, California 45. These could be very close races to watch for as well. New York 19, New York 4, California 27, Oregon 5, New York 3 were all 4 points or under. Those are all expected to be close again in 2026. So that's what it ended up looking like on that front. And in 2024, the national House vote went for the Republicans 50.6% to the Democrats getting 47.8%. That's about a 2.8% national win for the Republicans over the Democrats. Now, in 2022, the Republicans won 50.3%, Democrats 47.3%. That was a 3-point national win. I'm going to take away the flip part here just to show you just what the numbers ended up being. Republicans had a very similar map to now, where they have 222 House seats to Democrats' 213. But again, 2022 was the midterm election under President Joe Biden. So historically, midterms go well for the opposite party that's not in charge of the White House and of government. In 2022, the Republicans were the party seeking to benefit. It didn't exactly go according to plan in 2022, as the overturning of Roe v. Wade, in all indications, had a very profound Democratic voter turnout in 2022. So it looked like it could have been a very big night for the Republicans, where they won back the House and the Senate by large numbers. Ended up being more of like a closer to a 50-50 election, even though the Republicans did very well. But in 2020, this was the last time the Democrats won the national House vote. This is also the prior House map that was redrawn after the 2020 census. Here, the Democrats had a very close majority of 222 to 213 over the Republicans. And in this one, the Democrats got 50.8%, Republicans 47.7%. So this was about a 3.1% national House win for the Democrats over the Republicans. So 3 elections in a row now, the national vote has gone for one party over the other by around 3%. And that's important to mention, because right now in the generic ballot at this point in time, again, very early on in the election cycle, Democrats are currently leading over the Republicans by 2.4%. And when you look back at 2 recent midterms, 2022, the Republicans ended up winning by about 2.8%. And 2018, however, the Democrats won by 8.4%, which is a massive difference, and I'm about to show you how massive that could be. So again, Democrats in 2020 won the House 222 to 213, winning the House vote by 3. In 2018, a big midterm night for the Democrats got 235 House seats, Republicans have 200. This was a very big win for the Democrats, and the last time a House national vote was won by more than 3% or so at the generic level. 2016, the Republicans beat the Democrats in the House vote by only about 1.1%. So the norm for the House races recently has been a very competitive national election. However, the question is going to be, going into the midterm for 2026, it's really going to be about how the Republicans and President Trump are viewed by the American people, and do the American people want a fundamental change that would likely result in a Democratic victory. So right now, again, as I mentioned, the Republicans won by 3 points nationally in 2024. What I'm going to do here is use a edit by margin feature on the website map.jacksonjude.com and show you what this does. So you can edit the margin here for the Democrats. Shifting it 1 point would move it to about a 2-point Republican win, because it's about a 3-point Republican win. Shifting it 5 would be about a Democratic 2-point win. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to shift by approximately 5.5%. That would be about a 3-point shift. That would be about where a 3-point Democratic win would be right now. So I'm just going to go here, 3.5. Or, I'm sorry, 5.5. This would end up being about a 3-point win, okay? So I do that. This puts the Democrats, if it ends up going to the Democrats in the House by about 3 points based on the 2024 map, Democrats would get up to about 231 House seats, Republicans 204. This would be a very big shift for the Democrats and go from the Democrats being down about 3 seats in the U.S. House majority to being up now 231. Again, you need 218 for the majority. So the Democrats would have here about a 13 to 14 House seat majority. And this would be very big for them. You're seeing in this scenario also a lot of very close districts in 2026 or 2024 being Democratic flips here. Some notable ones. We have Iowa 1 right here with Marinette Miller-Meeks. Iowa 3 with Zach Nunn, the Republican, flipping Democrat. Don Bacon in Nebraska 2, who is retiring. That would also be a Democratic flip. Gabe Evans in Colorado's 8. That was a close Republican win. In 2024, a flip. That one would be going blue as well. And some of those likely seats that I mentioned that were probably going to stay on the Republican side, like Ryan Zinke in Montana 1, goes into the lean Republican margin. So not only have the Democrats flipped the map from 2024 to 2026 by about 5.5% up to a 3-point national win here, but you see the Democrats do really well here and go into a very sizable House majority. You also see some very close Republican races in 2024 also flipping, like Tom Keene in this district in New Jersey going to the Democrats. Mike Lawler's close district in New York being under a 1-point victory for the Republicans. And some close races in Arizona, in these 2 districts right here, also going lead Democratic. So this would be a very big win for the Democrats, getting the House up to 231 to 204 in this scenario. And this is only with the Democrats around a 3-point win or so nationally. What if the Democrats end up winning it by 4 points? We can shift it 1 more point to the Democratic side. The Democrats would pick up another few House seats going up to 234. Let's shift it another 1. What if they win it by 5 points? Democrats go up 235 to 200. Now we're going to go up to where the Democrats won it by about 8.5 in 2018. We'll keep going up. 1 more point would be 6. 1 more would be 7. 1 more would be 8. They would get the Democrats up to 240, Republicans 195. 1 more would get to about a 9-point win. If the Democrats match the 2018 levels, it's possible Democrats to have a House majority of 242 to 193. So the Republicans are in a really tough situation here going into 2026, where the Republicans really can't afford to lose the national House vote to be able to keep the majority in the U.S. House. And that's the problem for 2026, because right now, all midterm elections in the past suggest the Republicans should be poised to lose the House of Representatives in 2026. And going into Election Day right now, I fully expect the Republicans are going to lose the House in 2026 due to just the national trends. But again, the Republicans, to do that, would likely have to buck historical precedent and historical trends if they are going to keep the House. I will say, though, obviously, with all things in politics, especially in the President Trump era, politics are very volatile in the United States. If the Democrats are leading the national vote by 2.4%, the Democrats, albeit narrowly, are going to win the House. So the Republicans need to get this margin of 2.4% to their side come Election Day 2026, which I don't think is very likely to happen. But for the Republicans to win, the Republicans essentially are going to have to win every single one of these toss-up seats in this beige area. And that's going to be very tough for them to do so. If the Republicans were to win every single beige toss-up seat here, this would get them to a pretty good majority, up to about 223 to 206, with a few handful of other seats left out there. There's some in California, that in Michigan, that are kind of smaller to get to, that are still out there as well. But point being, the Republicans have to win all of them to get to this level without the Democrats flipping any in 2026, which is not really going to happen. Again, right now, the Republicans 208, Democrats 206 on the competitive ranking. The current House ranking, Democrats have about 215 when everything is set in stone. So what could Republicans do to mitigate this? Because Republicans are probably going to lose the House based on the current map. Well, if you've been following the news, Republicans have been having conversations about trying to redraw Ohio and Texas. And that's likely to do for the fact that they know the Democrats are probably going to win the national environment by at least 3 points in 2026. So what if the Democrats can redraw the map to win Ohio 9, which is Democratic held by Marcy Kaptur, and Ohio 13, which is held by Democrat Amelia Sykes, and maybe Ohio 1, which is held by Democrat Greg Landsman. Well, that would get Republicans an extra 3 seats and get them up to 211. That would be good, but that may also not prevent them from holding the House. Well, now Republicans are looking at Texas. Could they flip Texas 28 to their side and Texas 34 to their side. That would get the Republicans up to 213. That gives the Republicans a more manageable map. But even if they were able to flip Texas and Ohio and redistrict to their side, that doesn't 100% guarantee the Republicans the majority either way, though, because the Democrats winning the national environment in 2024 or in 2026 would still give the Democrats a very real chance at doing so. Again, the Republicans won 51 to 48 or so by 3 points in 2024. In that edit by margin situation here, again, if we shifted by about 5 points towards the Democratic side, this would only end up being about Democrat +2. The Democrats would still have 230 House seats based on the 2024 results. That would be enough to give them the majority. And again, you only need 218, which is about a 12-seat majority. If the Republicans redraw in Ohio and Texas, that would give them 3 extra Republican seats in Ohio and then probably 2 extra seats in Texas. That would give about 5 extra seats to the Republicans. That would bring the Democrats down to 225, Republicans up to 210. The Democrats would still have enough based on all the other House maps to have a narrow majority. So if you're a Republican, not trying to be doom and gloom on you, but the simple reality is the way the map is currently constructed, 2026, the Democrats, barring a complete polling miss or national environment shift over the next year and a half or so, the Democrats should be in a very strong position to win back the House in 2026. And for the Republicans to hold the House, they need something to really change that the polling data is not showing at this current point in time, and would likely need to redistrict Texas and Ohio to give them a chance that nothing else would change. And that also goes without saying that for the Republicans changing Texas and Ohio, that means no other state would change as well. Gavin Newsom in California has threatened to redraw the congressional map if the Republicans go through with that in Texas and Ohio. Obviously, that would be a probably constitutional lawsuit that would go on there if that would be allowed to go through or not. But that could potentially net the Democrats some extra Democratic seats if that went through. Wisconsin, even though the Supreme Court ruled out changing the constitutional map in a recent lawsuit in Wisconsin, another lawsuit has been filed. Maybe that ends up giving the Democrats an automatic flip in Wisconsin 3. I think the Democrats are probably more favored to win Wisconsin 3 in 2026 anyway, but that could give the Democrats an automatic Democratic seat as well. So when you start looking at the 2026 elections here, they're certainly going to be very close, and it's going to be a very close House majority no matter who wins. But based on the historical precedent of midterm elections and the way the current generic congressional ballot polling is going right now, the Democrats are certainly favored to win the House in 2026. And the only way the Republicans can really reach that 218 number and win back the House is the redistricting in Ohio and Texas, and then hoping the polling data essentially ends up being wrong in 2026, and the Republicans end up having the flip of 2022, where the Democrats end up doing better than expected. The Republicans would need that for 2026. There's a lot of seats, about 18 seats up in the toss-up category still after doing Ohio and Texas. The Republicans need to win 5 more of the 18 seats, which with Texas and Ohio redistricted and added to their column, it gives them a better chance at doing so, but in that election environment, it's still likely going to be very, very tough. But I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to hit like and subscribe if you did. Leave a comment below, tell me your thoughts on this. Do you think the Republicans could win the House in 2026, or do you think it's going to be a pretty much guaranteed flip for the Democrats? Leave your comments down below. Thank you so much for watching. Hope to see you in a future video. Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. Today I'm looking at the 2026 US Senate map, and after a few days ago I did a video on how the Democrats could reach 51 Senate seats. I'm also going to do a video today on how I think Republicans could reach 51 Senate seats. Now it's a little bit different than the Democrats because the way the Senate map is currently constructed and this Senate map that's up in 2026 is more of a Republican-friendly leaning map than a Democratic-friendly leaning map. The Republicans have a much easier time at reaching that 50 to 51 Senate seat mark for 2026. It is also worth noting the Republicans have the advantage of having Vice President J.D. Vance being a Republican, as Senate rules state if both the Republicans and Democrats have 50 senators, that the Vice President then breaks the tie. So when you normally need 51 seats to have a majority without the Vice President factored in, 50-50, the Republicans really only need 50 seats to have a majority. But the Senate seats that are up in 2026, a good number of these we know how they are going to go. I'm going to start first by doing the states that I view as safe for the Democrats, because there aren't really as many of those seats as there are safe Republican ones. Oregon, I would consider safe for 2026. The state of Colorado could be considered a likely Democratic seat, but the Republicans have not really had a contentious election for Senate in Colorado since 2014, where the Republican won, or 2014 where the Republican won, or 2016, which was a lean Democratic win. So Colorado, I expect to be a safe Democratic win. New Mexico, you could argue whether it's going to be a safe or likely Senate seat for 2026. The margins may end up being likely Democratic, but in 2026, which is supposed to be a more Democratic-friendly year, I don't think Republicans are going to be able to contest New Mexico all that much. So for today's video, I'll put it as safe Democrat. Illinois, despite 2024 being more competitive in the midterm environment, Illinois is going to be safe for the Democrats. Then you have the state of Delaware. This is going to be a safe Democratic win. Virginia, I believe this is Senator Mark Warner, unless Glenn Youngkin, the Republican governor of Virginia, who is term limited, decides to run for this race. Any Republican they put up against Mark Warner is probably not going to come close to winning. Again, like with New Mexico, it may be under that 15% margin of victory, which would technically make it a likely Democratic win. But again, I don't think it's going to be all that contentious, so I'll put Virginia as safe Democrat. New Jersey with Cory Booker as well. Despite New Jersey trending more to the Republican side in 2024, Cory Booker is pretty popular in the state of New Jersey. He has very good approval ratings. He's not going to be in any danger of losing as well. Rhode Island is going to be safe Democratic, as well as safe Democratic for Ed Markey in Massachusetts as well. This gets the Democrats up to 43 House seats, or Senate seats, excuse me. Now for the Republicans, they start out with 31. The good news for them is they have a lot of Senate seats that are going to be safe in this election. So the Senate seats in Idaho, Wyoming, and Montana are all going to be safe Republican. Unless a Democrat like Steve Bullock, the former Democrat governor, runs for Senate in Montana again in 2026. We just saw John Tester lose his Senate seat by about 8 points in 2024 in Montana. Unless him or Bullock were to run again, maybe the margins would then be under 15%, but Montana is not going to be too competitive in 2026. South Dakota is also going to be safe for the Republicans. Nebraska, I'm actually not going to cover yet because that is a special case where it could be more competitive. Kansas and Oklahoma, I think, are going to be safe Republican wins. Alaska, I've seen some talk of this one maybe being competitive, and the only way it does is if the former Democratic Congresswoman Mary Peltola, who won a close election in 2020 and 2022, if she decides to run for this race, Alaska could potentially become more competitive, but until she officially enters that race, I don't think Alaska is going to be all that competitive. Republicans should hold on and win there. Republicans should also be safe and favored to win in Louisiana, in Arkansas, Missouri, Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky, and West Virginia, as well as the state of South Carolina with Lindsey Graham. Lindsey Graham, again, if he's the Republican nominee, the last time he was up in 2020, it was under 15% of the vote, but with President Trump's endorsement already, I think he should probably be fine in a general election, even if it does fall under 15. Now, the state of Florida, this is Republican Ashley Moody. This one could potentially be under 15% as well, but Florida has moved a lot to the Republican direction in recent years. Even in a Democratic-friendlier midterm election environment, I still expect Florida will stay more on the safe Republican side. This puts the Democrats and Republicans. Republicans are at 47 Senate seats. Democrats are at 43 after I've done all the states that I view as safe for the respective parties. So right away, the Republicans have about a 4 Senate seat advantage over the Democrats starting out with the safe seats at 43 to 47. Again, this is why I mentioned the Democrats have a much tougher math at trying to flip the Senate in 2026 than the Republicans do at trying to hold the Senate, as there's more safe Senate seats up for the Republicans than Democrats in 2026. Now, there are still 10 Senate seats that I think are going to be more competitive than the safe rating gives them, I would say, an indication on, or gives justice on. Starting with the state of Minnesota. Minnesota is usually more of a competitive state at the presidential level. It did vote for Kamala Harris by under 5% in 2024, with the governor of Minnesota, Tim Walz, running as her running mate. Minnesota is a state, though, that has a very long-standing Democratic voting record, both for president, which is going back a very long time into the 1900s now, and for Senate, where I believe Senator Norm Coleman was the last Republican to hold a Senate seat in Minnesota. It's possible at some point in the next 10 to 15 years or so the Republicans could make some very significant ground up in Minnesota in a similar way to what they did in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. But I don't think 2026 is the election environment for that to happen in. I think the Democrats win the Minnesota Senate seat, and I don't think it's going to be under by 5%. I think after Amy Klobuchar's safe win last time in 2024, I think the Democratic nominee, whoever ends up being, could easily win by at least more than 5% in 2026. Now that puts the Democrats up to 44. The next seat on this map that I think is the probably best case scenario for the Democrats would probably be the Senate seat in New Hampshire. Now, this Senate race currently held by Democrat Jeanne Shaheen. She is retiring, so it is an open race. However, U.S. Representative Chris Pappas, who has won very impressive victories, all by over 5 points or so, in his first congressional district since 2018, is going to be the Democratic nominee for Senate. He's facing off against former Massachusetts Senator Scott Brown, who in his own right is a very formidable candidate for the Republicans. But New Hampshire's had a pretty recent streak lately at the presidential level at voting for the Democrats, even if it's been very narrow at times, as it was in 2016. It was about a 3-point victory for the Democrats in 2024. The Democrats should have an advantage in this race at holding on and winning. In my most recent election predictions, I've had this race going as lean Democratic, where Pappas wins by about 4.5%, so just a bit under that 5% threshold. But I think at this point in time, the Democrats do start out as favorites to win the New Hampshire Senate race. But that puts Democrats up to 45, Republicans still at 47. But a lot of the seats left out there on the map are in states that President Trump won in 2024, including Ohio, Iowa, Nebraska, Texas, Georgia, North Carolina, and Michigan. The only seat that Trump did not win was the state of Maine. Now, Nebraska is very interesting because this is a state that would typically be a safe Republican seat. However, there was an independent candidate last time around that ran in 2024, Dan Osborne, who ran a very close race. And just to show you what that ended up looking like, he only lost to Republican Senator Deb Fischer by 6.7%. The Democrats did not run a candidate, so it was just the Fischer, the Republican, versus Osborne, the independent, and it ended up being very close. Now for 2026, Republican Senator Pete Ricketts, who albeit is more popular than Senator Deb Fischer is based on approval rating polls, so he should have an easier time at defeating Osborne than Deb Fischer did. He also has the advantage of knowing who Dan Osborne is and how competitive he could be at the general election level. However, Osborne this time around will also have more name recognition than last time, and it's also worth noting the election environment for 2026 should be more favorable for the Democrats. So it's very interesting to see how Nebraska is going to play out in 2026, but even still, Pete Ricketts, I think, shouldn't have too much of a problem holding on here in Nebraska. It will probably be under 15% for sure, but I think the Republicans should be able to hold on to Nebraska, and if they're not able to hold on in 2026, they're likely in for a much worse night than expected. This puts the Republicans at 48, Democrats are at 45. Then you have a handful of Senate seats in Michigan, Maine, North Carolina, and Georgia, which are looked at the main toss-ups for 2026. But there are 3 other Senate seats in Texas, Iowa, and Ohio that Democrats are targeting that are more likely Republican seats that are getting interesting for potentially different reasons. One is in Texas, where Republican incumbent John Cornyn is being challenged by Attorney General Ken Paxton, who is certainly a very scandal-plagued candidate, and is giving the Democrats a potentially rare opportunity at making a Texas Senate race very competitive. Texas back in 2018 with Senator Ted Cruz only went for him by 2.6%, and that was the last Democratic-friendly midterm election environment that happened. So there is historical precedent for Texas Senate races getting very close. However, if Ken Paxton's even the Republican nominee, that point is being called into question at this point in time. So if it ends up being Paxton versus whoever the Democrats end up putting up, that could get into a real conversation of the Democrats could maybe flip this seat. But even then, seeing Texas go blue, even with Paxton as the candidate, is still a little bit of a stretch too far. I think the Republicans would still narrowly hold on to Texas in this scenario. Iowa is where the Democrats are really hoping that Republican Senator Joni Ernst likely stays in this race, which that's a whole other conversation, and the Democrats get to run against her. Joni Ernst has made some recent comments when the Medicare, Medicaid parts of the One Big Beautiful Bill were being talked about. Joni Ernst made a comment where some questions were being asked to her saying that people getting thrown off Medicare and Medicaid could cause people to die, and Joni Ernst said, well, we're all going to die. And she was getting absolutely panned on social media for her saying that. Now there are recent reports that Joni Ernst may not even run for re-election in 2026. She may end up retiring. And if you're a Democrat and you want to see Iowa try and go blue in 2026, Joni Ernst retiring is actually not a good thing for the Democrats in that scenario. Because I think whoever generic Republican ends up being, or the rumored replacement for Joni Ernst would be Representative Ashley Hinson, her approval ratings are likely going to be a lot higher than Joni Ernst in Iowa. But even still, Joni Ernst, she ran back in 2020 and won re-election by 6.5%. So even if Ernst ends up being the Republican candidate, I still expect her to win Iowa by a pretty reliable margin in 2026. But if the Democrats had a good enough election environment, maybe it shifts under 5%. Even still, this gets the Republicans up to 50 Senate seats, and the Republicans only need one more of the remaining 5 to hold on and win. And I think the most likely place for that to happen would be from the state of Ohio. This is Republican incumbent Senator Jon Husted, who is filling the remainder of J.D. Vance's term going into this election, as Vance is now the vice president. Ohio had a very close Senate race in 2024, where the Democratic incumbent Senator Sherrod Brown lost to Republican Bernie Moreno by 3.6%. It was very close in an election environment where President Trump was at the top of the ticket. If Sherrod Brown were to run again in 2026, this would give the Democrats an A-plus all-star recruit candidate in a very similar way that Roy Cooper is in North Carolina, and it would also be an election environment more friendly for Democrats. Now, the main hiccup in this situation is Sherrod Brown has not said what he's going to do in 2026. If he'll run for Senate, if he'll run for governor, if he'll decide just not to run for anything at all. So his future is still very much to be determined. And I think Ohio goes like this. If it's Jon Husted versus any generic Democrat, I think Ohio starts out as likely Republican and is probably going to give the Republicans a 51 Senate seat without too much of a problem. If it's Jon Husted versus Sherrod Brown, then this could get very close. I would have it starting out as lean Republican, but if you were to tell me in 2026 the Democrats have a massive wave election and Sherrod Brown ends up winning back Ohio to the Democratic side as one last little late Democratic resurgence, I wouldn't really be all that shocked, in all honesty, seeing as in 2024 it was a 3.6% race when the Republicans have been doing very well in the state of Ohio in recent years. In a more friendly Democratic election environment, that wouldn't shock me all that much, to be completely honest. But until Sherrod Brown makes that decision, the Republicans are probably going to win Ohio. This will get the Senate up to 51 Senate seats, Democrats 45. This is, I think, as of right now, the bare minimum for the Republicans in the 2026 elections. Now, it's possible Republicans could lose Ohio, they could lose Iowa, they could lose Texas, and maybe they even could lose Nebraska. But the recent election history and precedent in these states suggests they'll probably hold all 4. The only caveats here being exceptional candidates in Ohio and Nebraska and poor Republican candidates in Texas and Iowa, which certainly could happen, but as of right now, I would bank on the historical voting history of the states overruling the candidate qualities regards in that. And then you get into the 4 remaining battleground seats for the 2026 Senate elections in Michigan, North Carolina, Georgia, and Maine, which in other videos I've gone into long discussions about. All of them are very close. All of them can certainly go for one party or the other. But you could even give the Democrats all 4 of them in this scenario, and the Republicans would still be able to reach 51 Senate seats and have a clear majority in the U.S. Senate. The question will be how large their majority will be, especially going into 2028, where the Senate map is more of a Democratic-friendly map than 2026 is more of a Republican-friendly map. So the Republicans in 2026 are in a pretty good position here at holding the U.S. Senate in 2026. They really don't have too many paths to worry about in holding the Senate. The only way the Republicans should start to really get concerned is probably with Ohio if Sherrod Brown decides to run, and if Ken Paxton stays in the Texas Senate race and becomes a Republican nominee, and everything starts to bottom out. Because if that were to happen, where Ohio becomes very close, and Ken Paxton's doing so poorly it makes Texas competitive, well, if those two were to become toss-ups, that gets the Republicans to 49. In that scenario, the Democrats have a real opportunity at winning the U.S. Senate. But even in doing so, the Democrats would still also have to flip the state of Maine, where Republican incumbent Susan Collins is running for re-election as of right now. She's not said she's going to retire at this point in time. If Susan Collins does retire, which there is a small possibility she might, she hasn't given any indication that she will, but if she were to retire, that would almost guaranteed be a Democratic flip. That would put the Republicans in a much trickier situation if Ohio and Texas were to become competitive, because then the Democrats would have a very realistic chance at winning the Senate back. But the long assumption has been that Collins will run for re-election. And for now, my most recent prediction had her winning by a lean margin. This puts the Republicans at 50. The Democrats, however, if they were somehow able to run all of the gauntlet here and win close Senate seats in Michigan by a close margin, in North Carolina by a close margin, Jon Ossoff wins re-election in Georgia, and then the Democrats somehow manage to win Ohio and win Texas, well, in this scenario, things usually don't happen in a vacuum. Maine would probably end up going to the Democrats too. This would get the Democrats up to 51, Democrats 49. But for this to happen, a lot of things would have to go wrong for the Republicans in 2026. That even in a Democratic-friendly national environment, I just don't think it's very likely to happen. I think Texas and Ohio staying lean Republican at very least is more likely than not going to happen. And even if the Democrats are able to finally unseat Susan Collins, that would still give the Republicans a 51-49 majority. But I'm interested to hear what your thoughts are. Leave your comments below. If you have any thoughts or questions about anything I went over in this video, please leave them down below. I'll do my best to try and answer any questions that you have. Also, make sure to hit like and subscribe on this video, as I post multiple videos every single day that you're not going to want to miss. Thank you so much for watching. Hope to see you in a future video. Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. Today we're talking about the 2026 Wisconsin governor's race, where Republican Bill Berrien, a businessman and retired Navy SEAL, has officially entered the GOP primary race for this governor's race. And I'm not going to go over the whole article in this one. I'm just going to do a very quick beginning part of the article read here, where it says Republican Bill Berrien, a Navy SEAL veteran and manufacturing CEO from Whitefish Bay, officially launched the campaign for governor of Wisconsin July 9th, comparing himself to President Trump as a political outsider. Berrien criticized the incumbent Democratic Governor Tony Evers on issues like immigration, transgender athletes, and Evers' state budget proposal. Berrien's campaign emphasizes his business background and America First approach, highlighting his commitment to Wisconsin manufacturing jobs. The Republican field for 2026, the governor race, is currently growing, with lots of other potential Republican candidates as well, which I'll be getting more into in just one moment. But first things first, it's important to note that this governor's race in Wisconsin is one of the most marquee ones to watch for in 2026. Right now, on the governor's map for 2026, given my own personal rankings, I have about 6 governor's races right now that I currently have a no rating label on. Now, these all have varying degrees of competitiveness. For instance, Kansas, I think is going to go Republican, but I'm just waiting for more information to hear who the candidates are going to be first. And then you have states that are actually legitimately competitive. And for a state like Wisconsin, I think it certainly could be. Now, in 2022, the Democratic governor, Tony Evers, who won a very close election in 2018, won re-election against Republican Tim Michels by 3.4%. And when you look at the state of Wisconsin, you'll see the map here. There'll be a lot of red throughout the state, and then there'll be very small pockets of blue. But the small pockets of blue have a lot of the state's population in them. And before I go into the map here, I'm just going to show you the overall vote numbers, where Tony Evers got about 51.15%, Tim Michels 47.75%. 2022 was also supposed to be more of a Republican-friendly national midterm environment than 2026 is likely going to end up being. But when you look at the state of Wisconsin in 2022 on this map, this right here is the city of Milwaukee. This is a very big Democratic vote getter, and you saw Tony Evers won here handily. The surrounding counties did vote for the Republicans, Tim Michels, but the margins in which they voted Republican could make the difference between winning and losing a very close election in the state. Also with that is the capital city of Madison, where this is where Madison is, and these surrounding counties also make a very big difference in terms of which candidate the Democrat or Republican will win. And when I go county by county in Wisconsin in just one second, I'll show you what I mean by that. Because look at this. These counties right here, Democratic win, Democratic win, Democratic win, Democratic win, Democratic win. Let's go to the 2024 presidential race, where Donald Trump won the state of Wisconsin by 0.86%. Very, very close race. Look at these same counties. Columbia, Wisconsin, which again, Tony Evers won in 2022, President Trump won by 4.6%. Sauk County, which President Trump won by 1.7% in 2024, was a Democratic win. Iowa, Wisconsin, which was a Harris win, 7.6%, I would bet Tony Evers' margin of victory was larger in this county than it was for Tony Evers. Greene County, 0.27% win for Kamala Harris over Donald Trump. Very, very close win, though. In Rock, 7.3% for Harris over Trump. Now let's look at 2020. 2020, this is when Joe Biden won against Donald Trump by 0.63%. Tell me if this map looks a little bit more familiar. Columbia went to Donald Trump by 1.5%, but the margin was smaller. Sauk County voted for Joe Biden by 1.7%. Iowa was a 13.7% win for Biden over Trump. Greene County, 3.2% for Biden over Trump, and Rock was 11.2% for Biden versus Trump. So as you see here, aside from Columbia County, this map looked a lot more like what Tony Evers did against Tim Michels in that 2022 governor's race. However, Biden only won by 0.63% in 2020. Tim Michels won that governor's race, or Tim Michels lost Tony Evers in that governor's race by 3.4%. So you likely saw even larger margins of victory in those key areas surrounding Milwaukee and surrounding Madison, but especially surrounding the Madison area. So Evers won a very close election in 2022. 2018, he won an even closer election, in this one against Republican incumbent Governor Scott Walker. And this was a very, very close win that everyone knew going into it was going to be very close and was going to be one of the closest races to watch for in the country. Scott Walker, the Republican governor at the time, who survived recall elections and such, was going up for a third term. The same election environment that will happen in 2026, where 2018 was a Democratic-friendly year, and Tony Evers decides to run for a third term, he would be facing the same scenario Scott Walker faced in 2018. But in this one, Evers was able to defeat Scott Walker in a very close margin. And again, tell me if you've heard this before. Blue right here, blue right here, blue right here, blue right here, blue right here. Tony Evers has done a very good job in the surrounding Madison area and running up the numbers in these close counties, where other Democrats, like Kamala Harris in 2024, could not do that. Scott Walker still getting 48.44% of the vote. Very, very close race here. Scott Walker did about a point or so better than Tim Michels did in 2022. Now that's all talked about as we bring up 2026, where the Democratic governor, Tony Evers, can run for a third term if he wants to. He has recently expressed interest in doing so, but has not officially made a decision as of yet. That decision was expected in the middle of 2025, could be happening literally any day or any week over the next few weeks and months or so. If Evers decides not to run, though, it will be an open race where I'm sure several Democrats would love to jump at the opportunity to run for governor. On the Republican side of things, though, it's possible Evers' decision could kind of be freezing the field here, because Republicans could certainly run against Tony Evers and potentially win this race. But as Evers, in recent polling, holds a pretty decent approval rating, it actually shows Republicans would likely have a better chance at winning this race, even in a 2026 midterm environment, which should be Democratic friendly. It does give the Republicans a better chance at winning if Evers is not the nominee. In a poll from Marquette from back towards the end of June, it shows that even though a majority of people from Wisconsin do not want Evers to run for a third term, at 42% saying yes, 55% saying no, that is higher than what Scott Walker faced back in 2018. According to the article, 36% said the people wanted Walker to seek a third term, 61% did not. And Scott Walker only ended up losing by a little bit over 1 point. So that extra little bit of support for Tony Evers, even though it's a very disapproval number of minus 13, that difference of a little bit extra support would likely lead to a very narrow victory for Tony Evers, even if those numbers ended up holding the same. But Evers' current approval rating right now, between June 13th and June 19th, 2025, is overall positive +2, which Tony Evers does have going for him in 2026 if he does decide to run for re-election. He has a narrow but positive approval rating going into a Democratic-friendly midterm year in a very close competitive state. And after we saw the Supreme Court election in Wisconsin earlier in 2025, if Evers decides to run again, he would have a very strong chance of winning. Which is why you see U.S. Representative Tom Tiffany of the 7th District, who has expressed interest in running, not officially jumped into this race yet. If it's an open race, I would bet Tiffany certainly probably will be running for this race. If Evers decides to run, it could be more of a, do I want to risk losing my U.S. Representative seat, which should be a safe Republican win in all likelihood, versus running for an open governor's race will have a better chance of winning than against Evers. But right now, Bill Berrien is in this race, as well as Joe Showman, a Washington County executive. But no disrespect to these two men, someone like Tom Tiffany, a U.S. representative, would likely have higher name recognition in a Republican primary and would be more likely to receive the endorsement of President Trump, seeing as they have proven election history in recent years. And after President Trump endorsed Tim Michels in 2022 in the Republican primary, he likely wants someone that has a better chance at winning the general election for sure in 2026. Now, a few other Republicans that are listed as potential candidates particularly catch my eye. These are Eric Hovde, who was the Republican nominee for Senate in 2024 in a very close race, and Tim Michels, the nominee from 2022. Tim Michels lost, though, in 2022, again, after receiving President Trump's endorsement. So I think the odds of him getting into this race and getting the endorsement of President Trump is probably a little bit smaller, but he could potentially run again as well. Eric Hovde is very interesting, because Eric Hovde in 2024 lost to Democratic Senator Tammy Baldwin by 0.85%. Now, this was on the same ballot as President Trump winning by 0.86%, so it was almost an exact flip of the Republican and Democratic Senate margin of victories here. But Tammy Baldwin, back in 2018, won by 10.8%. So a likely Democratic win by a very large margin here. Eric Hovde came very close to defeating Baldwin in this Senate race. Very, very close. And Hovde, you'll see here, we actually see Columbia County going red for Eric Hovde in this scenario, and very close margins in this neighboring county as well. So Hovde put up a very close race in this Senate race. Could he potentially pivot that into a governor run in 2026? Could be possible. But again, going up against Tony Evers, who put up very impressive numbers in 2022 and in 2018, would he want to do that after running such a close race in 2024, or would he rather do it if it was an open race? That all remains to be seen. But talking about 2026, right now this race is certainly going to be one of the closest marquee matchups to watch for in 2026. If Tony Evers decides to run, I would have this race starting out as lean Democratic, where right now that would be a 1 to 5 point Democratic win, and I think Evers standing as a popular governor and with good approval numbers and a good election environment for the Democrats sets him up to win. Now, if Evers decides not to seek an additional term, this does give the Republicans a better chance of winning, in my opinion, and the Republicans will likely have a candidate at least with higher name recognition or on par with whoever the Democrats end up nominating. It'll be a lot closer, but again, given the election environment in 2026 is supposed to be more Democratic friendly, I would still start Wisconsin's governor's race off as at least tilt Democratic, which is a very similar category to what I have the state of Michigan starting out with. Another key caveat here is Republicans have done very well in the state of Wisconsin when President Trump has been on the ballot at the same time. Trump won by 0.86% in 2024. Trump in 2020, which it very narrowly went for the Democrats, by 0.63%. And in 2016, Trump won the state by 0.76%. Senate elections, for instance, in 2022, Ron Johnson, the Republican, won by 1%, a close Republican win, but he did win in the Republican-friendly midterm by about 1 point. 2018, the Democrat Tammy Baldwin, without Trump and the Republicans at the top of the ticket, a Democrat-friendly midterm year, went Democrat by 10.8%. At the governor level in 2022, Tony Evers won by 3.4%, and in 2018, won 1.1% for the Democrats against a Republican incumbent. And this even goes down to the House level a little bit as well. When you can look at 2022, Wisconsin's 13 was about a 3.7% win here. Actually pretty close. 2018, however, it was drawn differently, but this was a Democratic seat. So the Democrats seem to do better in the Rust Belt in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania when President Trump is not at the top of the ticket. And that could be something key to watch for 2026, and may even play into the fact of Tony Evers deciding to seek a third term or not. But things are certainly underway in the 2026 Wisconsin governor's race, and until Tony Evers makes a decision on if he's running again or not, that will likely depend on if the field is going to grow and who Republicans or Democrats are ending up running for those nominations. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like and subscribe if you did. Leave your thoughts down below. I'll do my best to answer any questions or comments that you have. Also, make sure to keep coming back and watching my videos, as I post multiple videos every single day that I'm sure you're not going to want to miss. Thank you so much for watching. Hope to see you in a future video.